Story 1. It was the first night of summer vacation. The air was warm, fireflies were flying through the air, and a bright full moon lit up the night sky. It was just me and my buddy Luke. Luke was sleeping over that night. We started off the night by playing video games, but after I beat Luke at Call of Duty a few times, we got bored. We decided to play the game that all kids play at least once during their childhoods. Ding Dong Ditch. Luke and I weren't bad kids at all. We never did anything like this before. I think it was just a mixture of boredom and the excitement of summer vacation. The first house we hit was Miss Johnson's house. I rang the bell. After running away from the door quickly, Luke and I sat behind the oak tree in the front yard. We watched in laughter as Miss Johnson came to the door donning her nightcap. She peered out into the front yard, muttered a barely audible curse, and closed her door. We walked on to the next house. This house was owned by Mr. Myers. The entire house had its lights out. I ran to the doorstep, knocked on the door firmly, and sprinted away. Luke and I stood behind a car parked on the curb. We didn't hear any noise or see any movement within the house. It looked as if it was abandoned. We figured Myers wasn't home. It was at this point in the night that it was getting kind of late, and to be honest, we really didn't want to get in trouble, so we returned to my house and went directly to bed. Luke and I laid down on the floor of my bedroom. It was really hot that night, so I decided to crack open the window before we fell asleep. A few minutes later, I was awakened by Luke's screams. He pointed towards the window. Halfway inside stood a man with a large smile on his face. His eyes seemed to gaze into my soul. "I missed you at my front door, little pal. Was I invited to the sleepover?" The man muttered as he continuously grinned. Awakened by our scream, my dad burst into the room. The man was gone. He somehow managed to leave before my dad even caught a glimpse of him. Needless to say, that was the last night we played Ding Dong Ditch. Stay safe this summer, guys. You never know who will follow you home. Story 2. It was a cold winter night in the middle of suburbia. I was stuck hanging with my kid brother Henry. We were too young to get into a pub, and most of our friends were away for the holiday weekend. Since there was nothing else to do, we decided to tell my parents we were going out to play in the snow. In reality, we decided to play every kid's favorite childhood game, Ding Dong Ditch. The snow was coming down pretty hard at that point, and it was extra cold that night, but it didn't matter to me. We grew up in the area, so we were used to the cold. The first house we hit was a total blast. I rang the bell, and an old guy came to the front door wearing an old robe. He kept screaming for us to leave him alone before slamming his door. The next few houses were all empty. We were about to give up and head home until we saw the old Jackson farm had its lights on. The Jackson farm is a huge farm in our area. The catch is, there's a huge lake separating the farm from the road. There was a bridge that we could use to cross the lake. However, it had not been shoveled and it was covered in snow. Thus, Henry and I decided to walk across the frozen lake. Now I know that sounds utterly insane, but it was very cold, and kids did this sort of thing all the time in our area. I went first and sprinted across the lake before sliding onto the other side. Henry started slowly walking across, being careful not to break any ice. Just as Henry was halfway across the lake, someone opened the front door to the farm. It was the Jacksons' oldest son. "Get off our property or you'll be gone," the man yelled. Henry was so startled by the sudden screaming that he slipped and fell straight through the ice. I was a young kid, so I didn't know what to do. I tried to place my foot onto the lake, but I was simply too afraid that it would break. Henry wailed his arms and screamed for help. Suddenly, the man who had previously yelled at us rushed into the lake. He had on a wetsuit, so he was able to retrieve Henry and save his life. Henry had to be rushed to the hospital to avoid hypothermia, but in the end, he was fine. Pranking your neighbors might seem like a good idea, but trust me, it isn't. You never know when you will need them most. Story 3. It was a warm and abnormally quiet summer night. I live in rural Pennsylvania, so my home sits on about 6 acres of farmland. Don't get me wrong, having privacy is always great, but there is an eerily lonely feeling that comes out at night. After listening to some Scare Central videos on YouTube, I was about to head to bed. I poured myself a glass of water and placed it on my bedside. I lay down and turned off the lamp. As if on cue, as soon as my head hit the pillow, my doorbell rang. I wasn't too creeped out at first, as I go to bed very early due to my work schedule. I stood up and walked to the front door. I peered outside the glass window on the top of the door and saw what appeared to be a young girl standing there. I slowly opened the door. "Hi, how can I help you?" I asked the girl. The girl simply stood there. She was staring directly into my eyes, but she didn't mutter a word. Hello?" I said to the girl. The girl continued to stare at me. As soon as I was about to tell her goodnight, she turned her back and sprinted away from my house. I watched as she disappeared into the cornfields near my house. I was a bit creeped out, but not panicking yet. She was a defenseless child after all. I closed the door and headed back to bed. A few minutes later, there was another knock at my front door. I stood up, headed back to the front door, and peered through the top window. To my dismay, it was the same little girl gazing back at me. I opened the door. "Look, I'm trying to sleep. What do you want?" I muttered. She once again stared at me. She seemed so utterly calm. It was as if she had taken some sort of sedative. I asked 2 or 3 more times why she was there and what did she want from me. She refused to reply. Once again, she turned her back to me and ran back into the cornfields. As soon as I turned around to go back into my room, my heart nearly stopped. There were 4 masked men standing near the back door. They were holding axes. I turned around to run out the front door and was immediately hit in the head with a heavy object. I woke up the next day tied up on the floor of my bedroom. The intruders had taken everything of value: my television, my gold watch, and even my laptop. Never answer the door at night. You never know who is on the other side.